poor girl accidentally sent a message to a millionaire CEO asking for money to buy milk for her baby, and what he did surprised everyone. Before we start the story, leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy. Sarah Park held her phone tightly against her chest, feeling the weight of desperation pressing down on her. Her desperate eyes moved from the phone screen to the makeshift crib in the living room, where her 4-month-old baby was crying nonstop from hunger. She took a deep breath, trying to think of some solution. Any solution. But there wasn't one. The money was gone. The bills were overdue, and there wasn't even a single can of baby formula left on the shelf. Swallowing her pride, Sarah decided to ask for help from the last person she ever wanted to contact, Ryan, Noah's father. The man who turned his back the moment he found out she was pregnant, and who had pretended ever since that she and the baby didn't exist. She knew asking him for help was humiliating. But looking at Noah, his little face red from so much crying, she realized her pride couldn't be stronger than her son's needs. She took a deep breath. Tears blurred her vision as she started typing. Ryan, I know you don't want anything to do with me, but I don't have a choice. Noah's crying from hunger. I need $50 to buy formula. I'll pay you back as soon as I get my paycheck. I started working at Walker Enterprises 2 weeks ago. I'm so embarrassed to ask for money in advance. Please help me. It's not for me. It's for our son. Her fingers hovered over the send button. For a few seconds, she hesitated, but then she pressed it. Send. Her chest tightened right away. But when she looked back at the screen, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The number was wrong. Her eyes widened. Panic rose like a wave. No, this can't be happening, she whispered, clutching the phone to her chest. She looked quickly, and yes, the message hadn't gone to Ryan. It went to an unknown number. She tried to delete it, tried to do something, but it was too late. The 2 blue check marks were there. The person had already read it. Her heart raced. Her hands shook even more. A million thoughts ran through her mind. Oh my God, will they answer? What if they insult me? She closed her eyes tight, took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, with no idea that number didn't belong to just any stranger. It belonged to Richard Walker, the CEO of Walker Enterprises, the same company where Sarah had just started working as a janitor only 2 weeks ago. And at that moment, her life was about to change forever. Minutes later, Sarah's phone vibrated in her hands, making her heart jump. She took a deep breath before looking at the screen. The message said, I don't think this message was meant for me. Her face turned hot. Her cheeks flushed instantly. A mix of shame and desperation took over. I'm so sorry. Please ignore this. It was a mistake. I sent it to the wrong person. I'm really sorry, she typed quickly, hoping this would all just go away. She hit send, praying that would be the end of it. But before she could even breathe, a new notification appeared on the screen. Do you really need formula for your baby? Sarah hesitated, looking at Noah in the crib, still crying softly, his tiny hands moving in the air, searching for comfort that she just couldn't give right now. She took a deep breath and answered, almost begging for the conversation to end. Please, don't worry. It was a mistake. I'll figure it out. I'm sorry for bothering you. The silence lasted just a few seconds until another message came in, more direct, more firm, and completely unexpected. Give me your address. I'll bring the formula myself. She blinked, read it again, thinking she must have misunderstood. Her hands started to sweat. Her mind was spinning. This can't be happening. Really, it's not necessary. Honestly, I'll figure something out. It was just a mistake. I'm really sorry, she replied, her face burning red. But his answer came back even firmer. Send me your address, now. Sarah froze for a few seconds. Her pride screamed at her not to accept. But Noah's cries were breaking her heart. She looked at the crib, squeezed the phone in her hands, took a deep breath, and typed in the address. Just a few minutes later, she heard a car stopping in front of the building. She walked over to the window and pulled back the curtain and was left completely speechless. A sleek black luxury car parked right in front of the simple building where she lived. It looked like that car didn't even belong in that neighborhood. Seconds later, the door opened. A tall man, wearing a perfectly tailored suit with an elegant posture and a serious expression, stepped out of the car, along with 2 security guards. He walked confidently, holding 2 large bags in his hands. Right behind him, another guard was unloading several boxes from the trunk. Sarah didn't know if she should open the door, hide, or wake up from what might be a dream or a nightmare. Her heart was pounding so hard it felt like the whole building could hear it. The doorbell rang. She took a deep breath, fixed her hair, and slowly opened the door. As soon as her eyes met his, a chill ran through her entire body. "You're—" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He stood tall, looked straight into her eyes, and answered in a deep, steady, yet surprisingly calm voice. "Richard Walker." The world seemed to spin. This couldn't be real. She knew that name. Richard Walker, the CEO of Walker Enterprises, the same place where she had just started working as a janitor 2 weeks ago. The shock was so intense she had to grab the doorknob to keep from losing her balance. Without saying another word, Richard held out the bags to her. "I brought milk, diapers, some clothes, and a few toys. Thought this might help," he said with a softer expression. Sarah took the bags, looking at him, unsure if she should thank him, cry, or apologize again. She just nodded, completely speechless. Noah was still quietly crying, and that sound made Richard glance inside the apartment. He took a deep breath, and the tough look on his face started to soften. "May I come in?" he asked. Still trying to understand how her life had taken this turn in just a few minutes, Sarah opened the door wider and motioned with her hand. "Of course, please." He walked in, looking around. The apartment was small, but clean and tidy, despite the obvious signs of struggle. They sat down on the small couch in the living room. For a few seconds, silence filled the air. Then Richard, carefully observing every detail, asked, "Do you really work at Walker Enterprises?" Sarah nodded, nervously folding her hands in her lap. "Yes, I started 2 weeks ago, as a janitor." His eyes widened in surprise. "Seriously, what a coincidence. I'm the CEO of Walker Enterprises," he said, crossing his arms as if trying to process that information. Sarah's face turned completely red. She lowered her head, embarrassed, holding back her words, unsure of what to say. The silence in the room felt almost heavy. Sarah still didn't know if this was real or some strange dream. How, in just a few minutes, did she go from sending a message by mistake to now sitting in her own living room, face to face with Richard Walker, the CEO of the company where she cleaned offices? Richard quietly observed everything. His eyes scanned every detail of the small apartment. But most of all, he was watching Noah, who was now finally calm, drinking from his bottle with such focus that he seemed unaware of anything else going on. For a few moments, Richard stayed silent, as if deep in thought. Then he took a deep breath, uncrossed his arms, and sat up straighter on the couch. "Sarah," he began, his voice softer but still firm. "May I be direct?" She just nodded. "I don't like seeing one of my employees, or better yet, a mother, going through something like this. This isn't right," he said, looking straight into her eyes. "And I want to make you an offer." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "An offer?" she repeated, barely able to speak. Richard took another deep breath and then, without hesitation, said, "I want you to stop working as a janitor. I want you to come work directly with me as my personal assistant." She froze. For a few seconds, his words didn't seem to make any sense. "I'm sorry, what?" she asked, frowning, thinking she must have misunderstood. "You heard me right," he confirmed, still serious. "The salary is much higher. The benefits are excellent. Health insurance, childcare assistance, more flexible hours. You'll have stability. And more importantly, you'll be able to take better care of your son." Sarah blinked several times, trying to figure out if this was really happening. On instinct, she shook her head, refusing. No, I can't accept this. It's too much. I'm not qualified for that, sir. I don't have any experience," she replied, completely flustered. Richard took a deep breath, crossed his arms, and answered firmly. "Sarah, forget that way of thinking. You are smart, hardworking, and you know how I know that? Because no one, absolutely no one, handles what you're handling right now unless they are truly capable." She clasped her hands in her lap, struggling with her pride. "But what about other people? They'll think I got this job out of pity, or—" Her voice came out almost in a whisper. Before she could finish, Richard interrupted her firmly. "Let me tell you something. This isn't about what others think. It's about what you need. And honestly, Sarah, it's not just for you. It's for Noah. That little boy needs a mother who can give him a better life. And you can't let pride stop you from accepting help." She took a deep breath and looked at her son, who was sleeping peacefully after crying so much. That calm little face felt in that moment like the only thing that mattered in the world. For a few seconds, she battled with herself. Pride tried to scream louder, but the love she felt for Noah, that was stronger. Sarah lowered her head, closed her eyes, and with a shaky voice said, "All right, okay, I accept." Richard gave a slight smile and nodded. "Great decision. Starting tomorrow, you're no longer part of the cleaning crew. You'll be working directly in my office. Don't worry, we'll train you, guide you. You'll do just fine, I'm sure of it." She took another deep breath, feeling a mix of relief, gratitude, and at the same time, a deep fear of the unknown. "Thank you, really. I don't even know what to say," she murmured, still in disbelief. Richard stood up, straightened his jacket, and looked over at Noah again. For a few moments, he just watched the baby, wearing an expression Sarah couldn't quite read, something between tenderness, nostalgia, and sadness. "Well," he said, turning back to her, "get some rest tonight. Tomorrow, at 9 a.m., I'll be expecting you at the Walker Enterprises main building. Room 28, top floor. And please," he added, giving her a slight smile, "don't be late." Sarah let out a nervous laugh and nodded. "I won't." He turned, walked to the door, and just before leaving, looked at her one last time. "You've got more potential than you think, Sarah. You just need to believe in yourself." And with that, he opened the door and disappeared into the night. As soon as the door closed, Sarah dropped onto the couch, put her hands on her face, and took a deep breath. She looked at Noah, still sleeping peacefully, and for the first time in months, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The alarm went off at 6 in the morning, but Sarah had already been awake long before that. In fact, she barely slept at all. The anxiety, mixed with fear of the unknown, made her heart beat so fast it felt like it might burst out of her chest. She got up slowly, trying not to wake Noah, who was still sleeping soundly, his little face calm. As she prepared his bottle, her mind raced. She thought about everything that could go wrong, all the things she didn't know how to do, the fear of letting Richard down, or worse, losing the opportunity that could change her and her son's life. Looking at Noah, she took a deep breath, and, in the middle of all those emotions, managed to smile. She whispered softly, like a quiet promise, "Mommy's going to do this for you, my love. Everything for you." She took a shower, tied her hair back, and picked out the best clothes she had, a plain white blouse, black dress pants, and a pair of flats. She looked in the mirror, fixed her hair, and tried to convince herself that she was ready. It wasn't about appearance, she thought. It was about courage. At 8:30, she dropped Noah off with Mrs. Margaret, the kind neighbor who had offered to watch him. He was fine, calm, and that gave her a little more peace of mind. Soon she was walking toward the subway station. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because she was tired, but because her mind was full of doubts, insecurities, and that quiet fear of not fitting in. When she got off at the stop near the Walker Enterprises headquarters, she took a deep breath and looked up at the skyscraper that seemed to touch the sky. The building was so big, so elegant, so imposing, that she felt even smaller standing in front of it. She walked through the glass doors, trying to look confident, even though she was shaking inside. The receptionist looked up and smiled, a polite, professional smile that quickly turned curious when she heard her name. "Good morning. I'm Sarah Park. I have an appointment with Mr. Richard Walker." The woman typed quickly on her computer, and as soon as Sarah's name popped up, her eyes widened just a bit. She quickly hid it, smiling again, this time more warmly. "Of course, Miss Park. Elevator number 3, top floor, room 28. Sarah thanked him and walked toward the elevator. As she rode up, she stared at her own reflection in the mirrored panel, trying to convince herself that she could do this, that she belonged in that place, even though her heart was telling her otherwise. When the doors opened, a long hallway stretched out in front of her. Everything seemed to shine. Spotless floors, glass walls, a panoramic view of the city. At the end of the hallway, there was a door with a small plaque. "President, Richard Walker." She knocked lightly. "Come in," answered a deep, steady voice from the other side. As soon as she stepped inside, her eyes found Richard, who was standing, looking over some papers on a side table. When he saw her, he gave a slight smile and said, "Right on time. I like that." He walked over to the main desk and motioned for her to sit. Sarah did as he asked, adjusting herself nervously in the chair, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. "Starting today, You'll be working directly with me. Your job title is Personal Executive Assistant. And before you ask, yes, we'll train you on everything. Scheduling, meeting coordination, travel arrangements, documents, contracts, everything involved in my professional routine. She nodded, trying to absorb every word, even though her mind was still trying to process whether this was really happening. Okay, I'm willing to learn. Richard gave a small smile and replied, I don't doubt that at all. He picked up a tablet from the desk, unlocked it, and handed it to her. You'll use this to follow my schedule. Don't worry about making mistakes. Everyone makes them at first, and I have patience to teach. She smiled faintly, feeling a bit of relief, like a weight had just lifted from her shoulders. Thank you. Really, I promise I'll do my best. The first day felt like an emotional roller coaster. Sarah was quickly introduced to the executive floor team. Secretaries, directors, analysts, all perfectly dressed, elegant, like they had just stepped out of a high-end boutique. The looks she received were a clear mix of surprise, doubt, and judgment. Whispers started the moment she turned her back. Isn't that the cleaning lady? One secretary whispered, hiding behind a monitor. How is she now the CEO's assistant? Another replied, frowning, almost in disbelief. Something's not right here, added a third, crossing their arms. Pretending not to hear, Sarah kept her gaze steady, her chin up, taking deep breaths, trying to stay calm. Every time she sat at her desk, every time she looked at a new screen, at a system she didn't know, her heart tightened. Everything was new. Every command, every button, every corporate term seemed more complicated than the last. But one thing became clear to everyone on that very first day. Sarah was fast. Extremely fast. She wrote everything down. She asked about things she didn't understand. She observed every detail. When something wasn't clear, she stayed late, alone, trying to learn. And little by little, she started mastering tasks she never thought she'd be able to handle. Richard, who at first had been watching her closely, soon started to relax. Little by little, he realized his decision had been more than right. You have an impressive ability, Sarah, he said at one point, looking at her with an approving smile. Honestly, it's admirable. She lowered her eyes, embarrassed, but smiled, feeling a bit of pride for the first time since all this had started. Thank you. I just want to make this work. But despite the compliments, she couldn't ignore the side glances. During lunch at the executive cafeteria, Sarah noticed the discreet giggles, the whispered comments. She doesn't have the right profile to be here, said an HR manager, looking at her from the corner of her eye. Nobody goes from cleaning to the president's office like that. Something's going on here, another replied, shaking her head, suspicious. She held her tray, sat at a table off to the side, took a deep breath, and mentally repeated to herself like a prayer. This is for Noah, for him. Stay strong, you can do this. What she didn't expect was that in this new environment, where so many seemed to be rooting against her, an unexpected connection would start to grow. Surprisingly, the person who didn't seem bothered at all by her presence was Richard. On the contrary, as the days went by, he became more and more attentive. One afternoon, while they were reviewing contracts, Sarah's phone rang. It was Mrs. Margaret. Noah had a fever. Panic rose instantly. She looked at Richard, unsure how to say she needed to leave. Before she could even open her mouth, he noticed her worried expression and asked, Is something wrong? It's my son. He has a fever, she answered, her voice trembling, trying hard to hold back the tears. Richard stood up immediately, grabbed his blazer, and looked straight at her. Come on, I'll take you to him. She froze for a moment. Really? She asked, surprised by his unexpected reaction. Of course. Let's go, he replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. A few minutes later, Richard's car pulled up in front of Sarah's building. He walked upstairs with her to the apartment. As soon as they opened the door, they found Noah in Mrs. Margaret's arms, his cheeks flushed and his little face looking tired, the way babies do when they're not feeling well. When Noah saw his mom, he tried to smile, stretching out his little arms. And to Sarah's surprise, Richard stepped forward, picked Noah up, holding him with such care and ease that it seemed like something he did every day. It's okay, little guy. You're going to be just fine, he said, gently rocking him while softly rubbing his back. His voice, usually firm and serious, sounded different now, softer, warmer, more human. Sarah stood there watching, unable to say a word. Who would have thought that this serious, powerful man, the owner of one of the largest companies in the city, would hold her son like that, with such care, such tenderness, as if that moment mattered more than any meeting or contract. In that instant, something inside her shifted. And maybe, something inside him did too, even if neither of them was ready to admit it. Minutes later, Noah was asleep in Sarah's arms, still warm with fever. Richard stood nearby, hands in his pockets, remitting out his expression serious. After a few moments, with a calm but steady voice, he asked, "Should we go to the hospital? I know a really good one, private. They're excellent. They'll take good care of Noah." Sarah held Noah tighter against her chest and instinctively curled up on the couch, feeling uneasy. She looked up at Richard and shook her head. "No, it doesn't have to be a private hospital, Mr. Walker. I can't afford a place like that." Richard crossed his arms and stared at her like she had just said the most unreasonable thing in the world. "Sarah, your son has a fever. This isn't about money. It's about his health, and don't worry, I've got this. Please, don't argue with me about it." She tried to object, but quickly realized it was pointless. The firmness in his tone left no room for debate, and deep down, she knew Richard only wanted to help. She sighed, held Noah close, and simply nodded in silence. A few minutes later, they were in the car. Richard was driving, while Sarah sat in the back holding Noah in her arms, watching him with her heart aching. At every stoplight, she looked down at him. Even feeling sick, Noah seemed to find some comfort in her arms and in the gentle motion of the car. When they arrived at the hospital, Sarah felt her chest tighten even more. The place was so big, so elegant, so sophisticated, completely unlike anything in her world. "Mr. Walker, really, this isn't necessary. She started to say, but he cut her off, looking straight into her eyes. "Sarah, listen. There's no more discussion about this. Come on." She took a deep breath and followed him, staring at the floor as they walked. The embarrassment was so strong it felt like everyone was watching her, though in reality the hospital staff were simply doing their jobs, used to seeing important clients every day. They were quickly directed to the pediatric unit. The doctor arrived in less than 5 minutes, a middle-aged man with a calm voice and a warm smile. He examined Noah carefully, checked his throat, looked in his ears, took his temperature, and finally hung the stethoscope around his neck, offering a gentle smile. "Don't worry, it's just a common virus. Very typical at this age. Fever, fussiness, a bit of discomfort, all completely normal. I'll prescribe some medicine to control the fever, relieve the pain, and help him rest. With some care and plenty of love, he'll be just fine in 2 or 3 days." The wave of relief that washed over Sarah was so overwhelming she had to blink several times to hold back the tears. She thanked the doctor so many times it seemed like she'd never stop saying, "Thank you." When they left the hospital, Noah was already looking much better, sleeping in his car seat in the back. Sarah stayed quiet for several minutes, staring out the window, trying to process everything that had just happened. Suddenly, Richard's voice broke the silence. "Are you okay?" She looked at him, took a deep breath, and before she even realized it, the words started coming out, full of emotion. I don't know how to thank you for all this. Really, Richard. You didn't have to help me to do all of this. I don't even know how to respond. Just thank you. Truly. This means more to me than you can imagine." Richard kept his eyes on the road but gave a small smile. "Sarah, when I told you that you could count on me, I meant it. And honestly, you don't need to thank me. Taking care of Noah, it's simply the right thing to do." She pressed her lips together, took a deep breath, and looked at Noah, who was still sleeping peacefully. A faint smile appeared on her face. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't alone in the world. Then Richard glanced over at her and casually asked, "Would you like to grab a cup of coffee?" Sarah blinked, a little surprised. "Coffee?" He smiled. "Yes, there's a great little place just 2 blocks from here. It's quiet, cozy, and I think we both could use a coffee after everything." She hesitated for a few seconds, looked at Noah again, then at Richard. Finally, she nodded with a shy smile. "All right, I'd like that." A few minutes later, they stopped in front of a charming cafe, with small tables on the sidewalk and flowers in the windows. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the scent of warm bread, creating a welcoming atmosphere. They sat at a table near the window. Noah, still asleep, was in his car seat next to Sarah. The waiter brought 2 coffees, a slice of carrot cake, and a cheese croissant, all ordered by Richard, who gently ignored Sarah's quiet protests that it wasn't necessary. Their conversation started light, easy. For the first time since they met, it didn't feel like boss and employee, just two people sharing a simple moment, like the world outside didn't exist. Sarah talked a little about her life, the challenges of being a single mother, how every day felt like a battle. Richard listened closely, without interrupting, looking right into her eyes, as if he truly wanted to understand every part of her story. Then suddenly, a voice from behind shattered that peaceful moment. "So this is my kid, huh?" Sarah froze. Her body went completely still for a few seconds before she slowly turned around, heart pounding so fast it felt like it might burst. There he was, Ryan, standing there with his arms crossed, a crooked smile on his face, and a look in his eyes that mixed contempt, sarcasm, and bitterness. He looked straight at Noah, then at Sarah, and finally gave Richard a quick up-and-down look, as if trying to figure out who this man was beside her. "Looks like you're hanging out with rich folks now. Who would have thought, huh, Sarah?" She pressed her lips together, held Noah tighter, and answered, keeping her voice as steady as she could. "Ryan, please, don't do this here." But he ignored her completely. He stepped closer to the table, leaning in a bit, that unpleasant grin still on his face. "I just came to meet my son. After all, he is my son, right?" The tension in the air was almost unbearable. Sarah's hands were shaking, and her chest felt tight with stress. "Can we talk outside?" Ryan said in a tone that sounded more like a demand than a request. "We need to settle a few things." She looked at Richard, silently asking for support, but deep down, she knew that if she didn't go, Ryan would cause a scene, and that would be worse. "All right," she replied, trying to stay calm. She stood up, carefully picked Noah up, and walked outside, with Ryan following right behind. Once they were far enough from the cafe, he stopped, crossed his arms, and looked straight at her. "Looks like your life's gotten a lot better. Hanging out with millionaires now, huh? Nice upgrade." Sarah took a deep breath. "What do you want, Ryan?" He shrugged, smiling. "Oh, nothing big. I just thought maybe I should go to court, file for custody of Noah. I mean, I am his father, right?" She felt a chill run down her spine. You never cared about him, Ryan. You never checked in, never helped, never did anything." "Well, I care now," he replied, looking at his nails like he was bored. "And you know, all this could go away real easy, Sarah. All you have to do is help me out. Give me a little financial help, and I'll forget all about custody, court, visits. Simple." Sarah's blood ran cold. "You're blackmailing me." "Blackmail? No, come on." He smiled as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Just business. You help me out, I help you out. Everybody's happy." She held Noah tightly against her chest, feeling her hands shake. Fear was taking over, but at the same time, a new feeling was starting to grow inside her. Anger, a sense of injustice that got stronger with every second. And while she fought against these feelings, she didn't notice that someone was approaching. Richard, who had been watching everything from inside the cafeteria, quietly stood up, adjusted his jacket, and without Ryan noticing, started walking toward them, ready to step in. Richard approached silently, and the moment Sarah noticed he was there, she felt a wave of relief. That suffocating feeling of being cornered by Ryan eased a little, but not completely. Richard stopped next to her, gave Ryan a cold, suspicious look, and without saying a single word to him, turned to Sarah. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice calm but firm, with a tone that felt strong enough to break through any barrier. Sarah, still holding Noah tightly, forced a smile, trying to seem natural, even though she was falling apart inside. She avoided looking directly at Richard, maybe afraid he'd see just how shaken she really was. "Yes, everything's fine. Can we go?" She answered quickly, not really thinking, just wanting that moment to be over. Richard kept his eyes on her for a few seconds, as if reading every tiny expression on her face, as if he could sense, even without words, that something was very wrong. But realizing she wasn't ready to talk, he simply nodded. "Of course. Let's go." He made a simple gesture, inviting her to follow him, and without even glancing at Ryan again, Sarah held Noah tighter and walked back toward the car. As she walked away, she could feel Ryan's eyes burning into her back. Once they were in the car, Richard didn't say a word. He just started the engine and drove. The silence filled the space between them, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was heavy, full of things left unsaid, unasked questions, and at the same time, an invisible wall that made it impossible to say anything right then. Sarah tried to calm herself, taking deep breaths, staring out the window, as if watching the streets, the buildings, and the people could distract her from the storm going on inside her. In the back seat, Noah was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the tension in the air. Richard glanced at her from time to time. He could clearly see how nervous she was. Her fingers clutched the fabric of her clothes, her foot tapped anxiously, and the way she bit her lower lip gave away just how tense she really was. For a few moments, he thought about asking her. Seriously thought about it. But something about the way she answered back at the cafeteria, her scared look, and how quickly she asked to leave, made it clear this wasn't the right time. Pushing her to talk would only make her shut down even more. When they arrived in front of Sarah's building, he stopped the car and looked at her. "Do you want me to help you carry Noah upstairs?" he asked, keeping his tone soft. She shook her head, holding Noah tightly. "No, it's okay. I've got it. Thank you. For today. For everything." Richard took a deep breath, kept his hands on the steering wheel, and just nodded. "All right. If you need anything at all, call me, anytime." She nodded, picked Noah up in her arms, and got out of the car. As she walked toward the building entrance, she had the feeling Richard was still watching her, and he was. He stayed there, sitting in the car, watching until she disappeared inside. But if she thought that encounter at the cafeteria would be the end of her problem, she was about to find out it was only the beginning. The next morning, while she was trying to get things organized at home and pretending to herself that everything was back to normal, the first sign that this was far from over appeared. As soon as she picked up her phone to check her messages, there it was. A notification from a number she knew all too well, but wished she'd never see again. "Did you really think you could just ignore me, Sarah? You think it's all over just like that?" Her body went cold instantly. Her hands started to shake. She took a deep breath, squeezed her eyes shut, trying to convince herself it was just another attempt to provoke her. But before she even had time to react, another message came in. "If you don't want to talk, fine. We'll handle this another way. And trust me, you won't like it." Her heart started racing. Her hands were sweaty. She looked over at Noah, who was playing innocently on the rug, with no idea of what was happening, and she felt a knot tighten in her chest. Fear took over every part of her body. She tried to ignore it, took a deep breath, put her phone away, trying to convince herself that Ryan just wanted to scare her. But as the days went by, she realized it wasn't just that. Ryan was serious about his threats. She started noticing strange things. An unfamiliar car parked at the corner near her building, always at the same time. A man she recognized from a distance, one of Ryan's friends, someone she knew wasn't trustworthy, walking down the street, staring straight up at her apartment window. The messages kept coming. "I told you, if you won't do things my way, we'll settle this in court. And you know I can make your life a living hell, Sarah. So, you're hanging around with rich folks now, huh? Well then, give me some money, and I'll disappear." Every message felt like a stab in the chest. And with the fear came anger. How could someone be this cruel? After being gone for so long, how could he come back just to take advantage of her? And that same week, as if dealing with Ryan wasn't enough, another problem showed up. This time at work. It started quietly. Sarah was organizing weekly reports, keeping track of Richard's schedule, and reviewing documents when something in a financial spreadsheet caught her eye. There was a strange transaction. A number that didn't make sense. At first, she thought it might be a simple mistake. But as she looked closer, she realized it wasn't just one. There were several small amounts that, when added together, turned into a pretty significant sum. Sarah pulled reports from previous months, and as she kept digging, it became clear. This wasn't a coincidence. Something was wrong. Something big. She brought the information to Richard, pointing out the inconsistencies. At first, he stayed silent, staring at the screen. Then he crossed his arms, took a deep breath, and said, This isn't right. These transactions shouldn't be here." Immediately, he started pulling more data. With every file he opened, more red flags showed up. Small transfers to unknown accounts, payments that weren't properly recorded, invoices with no explanation. Sarah, her hands trembling, watched, feeling a chill run down her spine. "Do you think someone's stealing from the company?" she asked, her voice barely there. Richard narrowed his eyes, clenched his jaw, and answered, his voice deep and full of concern. "I don't think. I'm almost sure. They spent hours going through the data. Line after line, spreadsheet after spreadsheet, more proof kept surfacing. And the more they looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This had been happening for a long time. This is way bigger than I thought, Richard muttered, typing quickly, cross-checking information, looking for patterns. Even with her personal life falling apart, Sarah stayed focused, helping him, digging through the data, taking notes. She knew how serious this was. It could affect the entire company. But deep inside, the fear kept growing. Because while she was dealing with this crisis at work, she knew Ryan was still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. And at that moment, one thing became painfully clear. Her life would never be the same again. Richard kept his eyes glued to the computer screen, moving from one report to another, cross-checking data, analyzing every suspicious transaction. Sarah sat beside him, following every detail, writing down notes, and gathering more information. "This is worse than I thought," he said, crossing his arms, still staring at the screen. "These transfers aren't recent. Someone's been doing this for years." Sarah, scanning another spreadsheet, looked up at him. "And it's all very well planned. Each transaction looks small on its own, but when you add it up, it's huge, Richard." "Huge," he agreed, rubbing his hands over his face, visibly frustrated. "And whoever did this knows the company's internal systems inside and out. This isn't someone from the outside." She typed a few more commands and pulled up older reports. "These entries, they all have to be manually approved, right?" "Exactly. And to do that, you need high-level access," he replied, his expression getting darker. "Only 3 people have full access. Me, the CFO, and William." When Richard said the name, Sarah immediately noticed the weight it carried. She looked at him, trying to figure out if this was just a suspicion, or if, deep down, he already knew exactly who was behind it. "William Carter?" she asked, just to be sure. Richard nodded slowly, pressing his lips together. "My business partner for over 10 years. Someone I always trusted, or at least thought I could trust." Sarah watched his face and noticed something she'd never seen before: disappointment. This wasn't just about business, it was personal. "Do you think it's him?" she asked, looking straight into his eyes. It took Richard a few seconds to answer. "I don't want to think so, but the numbers are telling me otherwise, and honestly, numbers don't usually lie." She took a deep breath, pulled out another report, and studied it. "There's more here. Look at this transaction. It follows the same pattern as the other irregularities. And guess who signed off on it?" He looked. The name was right there, clear as day: William Carter. Richard clenched his jaw. "So that's it," he muttered, crossing his arms. "William's been stealing from us for years, and he wasn't even trying that hard to hide it." Sarah stayed quiet for a few moments. She watched his expression, the subtle changes in his face, and then she realized she was watching him a little too closely. She looked back at the screen. "So what do we do now?" she asked, trying to sound professional, though the worry in her voice still showed. "The first thing is to make sure he doesn't know we've figured it out," Richard said, turning his chair to face her. "And the second," he paused, looking directly into her eyes, "is for you to stay right where you are, here, with me, helping me." She froze for a moment. Her heart was beating faster than it should. "Of course," she replied, quickly looking away. "You can count on me." For a moment, the room went silent. But it wasn't an awkward silence. There was something in the air, a different kind of tension, hard to explain, something beyond what they were talking about. "Are you okay?" he asked suddenly, his voice softer. She was caught off guard by the question. "Me?" She blinked. "Yes. Why wouldn't I be?" "Because I know you're dealing with more than you should," he said, looking into her eyes in a way that made her heart skip a beat. "I saw it. At the cafe, that man. He's Noah's father, isn't he?" Sarah looked away at once, wringing her hands in her lap. "I didn't want you to know. I didn't want to drag you into my problems." "Sarah," he leaned in slightly, his tone calm but firm. "You're already part of my life, whether you like it or not. And if someone's threatening you, following you, that's my business too." She took a deep breath, pressing her lips together, fighting the urge to fall apart right there. But she couldn't let herself seem weak. I'm trying to handle it, Richard, really. You don't have to handle it alone," he said, folding his arms and locking eyes with her, making sure she heard every word. "I'm here. I'm not going to let anyone touch you, or Noah." Their eyes met. For a few seconds, the reports, the numbers, the fraud, William, all of it faded. It felt like only the two of them existed in that moment. Sarah realized she was holding her breath, and Richard was so close that, if she leaned in just a little. But he looked away first and stood up from his chair. "We need stronger evidence. I want to bring William down with everything we've got." She felt both relieved and disappointed in herself for even imagining something that clearly wasn't going to happen. "I can dig through older transactions, cross-check the supplier contracts. Maybe we'll find a pattern." "Perfect," he said, already back at the computer. "If anyone can do that, it's you." The hours passed, and the two of them became completely absorbed in their work. As the investigation progressed, it became more and more clear that William wasn't just stealing, it was an elaborate scheme. Fake companies, inflated contracts, and money transfers to foreign accounts. Richard studied each new discovery with a mix of anger and disbelief. "He did all this right under my nose, for years," he muttered, clenching his fists. "And I didn't see it." "This isn't your fault," Sarah said, looking right at him. "The only one who should be ashamed is the one who did it." He looked at her, held her gaze longer than he should have, and smiled. A small smile, but one filled with meaning. "You have no idea how much you've meant to me through all of this." She opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. She just smiled awkwardly, her heart racing again. When they finally looked at the clock, they realized the whole day had gone by. It was already night. "I think we need to eat something," Richard said, getting up. "I don't know about you, but I'm starving." She laughed. "I don't think I even had lunch today." He smiled. "Come on, let me take you to dinner." "Dinner?" she asked, a bit surprised. "Like, right now?" "Right now. You deserve it, and honestly, so do I." She hesitated for a few seconds, but then smiled, grabbed her bag, and stood up. "Okay, that's fine." They left together, talking, laughing, as if for a few hours they could forget about William, the problems, the threats, and everything else that was going on. And as they walked side by side, Richard glanced at her discreetly and thought that, of all the things that could have happened in his life, meeting Sarah was definitely not part of his plans. But somehow, it was becoming the part he least wanted to give up. The feeling that something was about to explode became impossible to ignore. Ever since they uncovered the fraudulent activities, the atmosphere at the company had become suffocating. Sarah and Richard spent days buried in the investigation, cross-checking data, gathering evidence, piecing together the puzzle that exposed William in a way that left no doubt. But the deeper they dug, the clearer it became that William was playing too. And he played dirty. That morning, Richard received an urgent notification from the company's internal system. Confidential data, which should have never left his control, had been compromised. He opened the report and saw something that made his stomach turn. There were records of bank transfers that appeared to have come from him. Millions of dollars sent to offshore accounts, directly linked to the same shell companies they had identified as part of William's scheme. "This can't be happening," he muttered, clenching his jaw, his eyes scanning the screen. "I never made these transfers." Sarah stepped closer, looked at the data, and felt her whole body go cold. This is serious. These records look authentic. They're under your login, in your name." He shook his head, clenching his fists. "This is fake. It's a setup. He planted this. He wants to frame me." Sarah pulled another report, trying to figure out how it had been done. "They manipulated the system records. This looks like it's been in the works for a long time." The office door suddenly burst open. 3 board members walked in, accompanied by a lawyer. Their expressions were hard, serious, almost hostile. "Richard, we need to talk," one of them said, making no effort to hide the accusing tone in his voice. "We've received an extremely troubling report. We need you to step down temporarily as president while we investigate these transactions." The shock hit instantly. Sarah looked at Richard, then at the board members, her heart racing. "This is ridiculous," she tried to say, but Richard raised his hand, signaling her not to speak. He stood up from his chair, crossed his arms, and stared at the men. "Do you really believe I'd steal money from my own company?" The lawyer held a folder thick with documents. "The evidence is strong, Mr. Walker. It's in the system, under your authorization." "This was planted," he said through clenched teeth. "And I'll prove it." "Until everything is cleared up, we're asking you to leave your position and the building immediately," one of the directors stated, holding firm. If you refuse, we'll have to take legal action." Sarah held her breath, wrapping her arms around herself, trying to understand if this was really happening. "This is a trap, and you're all falling for it," Richard replied, walking over to his desk and gathering a few things. "Don't worry, this isn't over." He looked at Sarah, who stood there pale and scared, and just shook his head, silently telling her to stay calm. They left the office together, walking down the hallway under judging eyes, whispers, and murmurs that felt like knives cutting through the air. Inside the elevator, Richard stayed silent for a few seconds. Then he took a deep breath, and with a more controlled voice, said, "William's desperate. This just proves he knows we're getting too close to the truth." "But what now?" Sarah asked, her voice almost breaking. Can they have you arrested?" "No. Not yet. But that's what he wants. He wants me out, discredited, destroyed." When they got to the parking garage, he grabbed her arm gently, looked her in the eyes and said, "This doesn't change anything. We keep going. And now we fight even harder." While they were still trying to process everything that had just happened, Sarah got a message that made her blood run cold. It was from Ryan. "Either you fix this fast, or I'll take you to court. And not just that, I've got powerful friends now. And trust me, they know exactly how to make you lose everything." Her body froze. Her hands started to sweat, her vision blurred. She showed her phone to Richard, who read the message and squeezed it so tightly it looked like he might crush it. "They're working together," he said through clenched teeth. "William and Ryan. It all makes sense now." Sarah held Noah in her arms, who was sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of what was happening. Her whole world felt like it was about to collapse. He's going to try to take Noah away from me," she whispered. "No, he won't." Richard's voice was so steady, so firm, that for a moment she almost believed him. "I promise you, they won't." She looked at him, searching for strength where she had none left. "But what if they do, Richard? What if I lose you, lose my job, lose my son?" Richard gently cupped her chin, making her look straight into his eyes. "Look at me. You are not losing anything. Do you hear me? I won't let that happen. I won't let them take anything from you, Sarah. Not you, not Noah, not your life." For a few long seconds, their eyes stayed locked, and in that moment, nothing else seemed to matter. She felt this overwhelming urge to just throw herself into his arms, as if that simple gesture could shield her from all the chaos around them. But she couldn't. Not yet. "So, what do we do now?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Now, we fight back." Back at her apartment, papers, files, and folders were spread out everywhere. Richard paced back and forth, while Sarah worked to organize the information. "We need to prove these records are fake," she said, looking up at him. "And fast." "I agree. And more than that, we need to expose William before he has a chance to do anything else." "And what about Ryan?" she asked, gripping her phone tightly, staring at the latest string of threatening messages. "He's using this to pressure me." Richard stopped pacing, walked over to her, and held her hands. "Sarah, look at me. He's not going to take your son away from you. You know why? Because now you're not alone." Her chest tightened, a mix of fear, anxiety, and a strange sense of relief, knowing he was there, that she didn't have to face this alone. I'm so scared of losing Noah," she said, feeling the tears welling up. Richard cupped her face with both hands. "That's not going to happen. Do you understand me? It's not." She closed her eyes for a few seconds, taking a deep breath, trying to absorb every word. When she opened them again, she found his eyes so close, for a moment she thought he was about to kiss her. But instead, he just smiled softly, brushing his thumbs gently over her cheeks. "You are stronger than you think, Sarah." And in that moment, as they looked at each other, they both knew they were in this together. No matter what came next. The next day, Richard paced back and forth, eyes locked on his phone, gripping it like he was holding more than just a device. Sarah sat at the table, reviewing the reports once more, while Noah slept on the couch, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. She watched Richard, trying to figure out if his silence was fear, worry, or something even deeper. Then suddenly he stopped, took a deep breath, and spoke with a firmness that made her whole body tense. "Enough. I think it's time you know everything." Sarah dropped the papers immediately and stared at him. "No." "What?" He sat down in front of her, crossed his arms on the table, and looked at her like he needed her trust now more than ever. "I've been suspicious of William for a lot longer than you think. Actually, since last year, but I could never prove it. Her eyes widened. You already knew? I suspected, but there was no proof. It all started to make sense when a few overpriced contracts showed up. Small transactions that, on paper, looked normal, and there was no way to report anything without solid evidence, because he always knew how to cover his tracks. Sarah leaned in, gripping his arm. So, when we started looking into this, you already. Richard nodded slowly. Yes, and not just that. I'm not doing this alone, Sarah. I've been secretly working with the FBI. The shock hit her so hard it took a few seconds to process what she had just heard. The FBI? That's right. They've been monitoring William for months, but they needed someone on the inside, someone like me, to provide detailed information they couldn't get at otherwise. And now, with everything you've uncovered, we're closer than ever to bringing this down. Sarah brought her hands to her mouth, trying to control the wave of anxiety rushing through her. Oh my God, you trusted me with this? Richard held her hands tightly. Since day one, and honestly, if it weren't for you, I don't think I would have made it this far. She swallowed hard, squeezing his hands back. Okay, so what do we do now? He looked into her eyes, so close that for a second she thought he might kiss her right then and there. But instead, he answered with the same steady tone he'd had all along. Now, we set a trap. Sarah pulled the reports back out and started matching up the data. These payments, they follow a pattern, always on the same days each month, going to the same accounts, which, not surprisingly, are tied to fake companies. If we can track those accounts, we might find the missing link. Richard nodded, pulling the laptop closer. What if we set up a fake deal, a big transfer, something he can't ignore? As soon as he goes for it, the FBI steps in. She frowned. And Ryan? He's part of this too. He is, and that's where it all connects. William promised to help Ryan get custody of Noah. In return, Ryan's been trying to shake you up, put pressure on me, threaten you. This isn't just about money. They're trying to take us down. Sarah clenched her jaw and crossed her arms. They're not gonna win. I swear they won't. Richard gently took her chin and made her look at him. That's it. Exactly. They have no idea who they're messing with. She smiled, but it was a shaky smile, because deep down, the fear was still there. Tight in her chest, hard to breathe. But there was also something else. A feeling she'd never had before. A sense of safety that didn't come from money or power, but from knowing she wasn't alone anymore. The hours passed, and they both got completely wrapped up in the plan. The FBI was called in. Richard made the call he'd been putting off for weeks. When the agent answered on the other end, his expression changed completely. It's time. We're ready. We have everything. The evidence, the records, the transaction patterns, and most importantly, the target. The agent confirmed the operation would be set up within 24 hours. They would have a surveillance room, agents inside the company building, undercover, ready to act as soon as William took the bait. Sarah helped put together the fake documents. The stage transfer was huge, too big for any thief like William to resist. She organized everything with such precision that even Richard was impressed. You know, he said, watching her type, I think you were made for this. She gave a small, modest smile. I think I was made to survive, Richard, and somewhere along the way, I ended up learning more than I ever thought I would. His expression softened. For a few seconds, he forgot about the numbers, the contracts, the fraud. He just looked at her. You're so much more than you realize, Sarah. She looked away, feeling her face warm. You too. Their connection grew stronger with each passing second. In the middle of all the chaos, they were building something they didn't fully understand, but it made perfect sense all the same. Once the plan was set, Richard held her hands. From here on out, there's no turning back. She gripped his fingers tightly. I'm with you. All the way. The FBI agent confirmed everything was in place. The trap would be set the next day during a meeting Richard had requested with William, supposedly to discuss an international contract, a fake merger with a multi-million-dollar transfer. Sarah handled every detail of the fake contract. Her knowledge of finance, something she had picked up almost by accident since starting as a secretary, was now critical to pulling this off. That night, while they reviewed every line of the contract together, Richard looked at her, held her hand, and spoke in a quieter voice, almost a whisper. I don't know where I'd be if you hadn't come into my life. She looked back at him. And for a few moments, words failed her. All she could feel was his gaze, his presence, that connection between them that just kept growing. Me neither, Richard. He gently ran his fingers across her hand, as if for a moment he'd forgotten the world, the problems, everything. But before anything else could happen, the laptop alarm went off, reminding them there was still work to do. The next morning, everything was ready. The office felt quieter than usual, like even the employees sensed something was off. Sarah and Richard arrived early, accompanied by 2 undercover agents who took their places inside the company. William arrived on time with the same confident smile as always, like nothing could touch him. He sat down in the conference room, opened his laptop, reviewed the contracts, and when he saw the numbers, his eyes lit up. "So this is it?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "An international merger?" Richard nodded. "An opportunity that could change everything." William studied the clauses, gave a slight smirk, and started typing on his laptop. "And when is this transfer supposed to happen?" "Now," Sarah answered, not taking her eyes off him. He looked at her, smiling like he underestimated her. An assistant talking about millions. Who would have thought, huh? But at that very moment, what he didn't know was that everything he typed was being monitored. Every click, every attempt to authorize the transfer, every move was being tracked in real time by federal agents. The plan worked. As soon as William tried to authorize the transaction, internal alarms went off. The conference room door burst open, and FBI agents stormed in. "William Carter, you're under arrest." His face lost all color. "This is a mistake. This is a setup." "No," Richard said, crossing his arms and looking straight at him. "This is called justice." As the agents restrained William, Richard stood there, arms crossed, eyes fixed on him. There was no satisfaction in his gaze, just the conviction that he was doing the right thing. Sarah stood by his side, holding Noah, her heart racing, unable to look away from the scene that, just days ago, seemed impossible. "You're all going to regret this," William shouted, struggling. "This isn't over." Richard slowly stepped forward, stopped right in front of him, and said firmly, "This is just the beginning, William." As William was taken away by the agents, Richard let out a heavy sigh and looked at Sarah. She didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or just collapse right there. It all felt so surreal. "We did it," she whispered, with a smile that was part relief, part disbelief. Richard didn't answer right away. He just reached for her hand, squeezing her fingers so tightly she could feel how hard this had been on him too. "This was only possible because you were by my side." They looked at each other for a few seconds, and in that moment, it felt like everything else faded away. The tension of the last few days, the fear, the threats, all of it seemed to melt in that single look. Richard leaned in, cupped her face with both hands, and without thinking twice, kissed her. It was intense, full of everything they'd both been holding back for so long. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a promise, a surrender. Sarah kissed him back without hesitation, feeling her heart beat so hard she thought it might burst. Her hands gripped his arms like she was afraid the moment might not be real. But it was. It was real. When they finally pulled back, they looked at each other, a little awkward, both smiling like they knew that from that point on, nothing would ever be the same. Richard started, still holding her face. "I don't know exactly when it happened, but I fell in love with you, Sarah. I fell in love with you and with Noah." Her heart tightened. The tears came, but they weren't from sadness. They were from relief, from love, from everything she never thought she'd feel again. "I love you too, Richard. I fell in love with you too," she said, holding his face like she wanted to make sure this was really happening. "And thank you. For everything. For not giving up on me, on us." The sound of the conference room door opening interrupted the moment. One of the agents walked in quickly, holding some papers. "We've got another one," he said, looking at Richard. The tracked calls and statements from a few employees confirmed that William wasn't acting alone. Richard narrowed his eyes. "Ryan," the agent nodded. "That's right. He's been helping William, clearly trying to pressure Sarah. He tried to use her son as leverage, with threats and blackmail. We've got it all recorded." Sarah felt her whole body go cold, even though she'd already suspected it. "He's going to pay, isn't he?" she asked, her voice shaking. "He will," the agent answered, looking at her. "The team is on their way to pick him up now." It didn't take long for the news to come in. Ryan was arrested right outside his building, completely caught off guard. He tried to resist, denied everything like he always did. But there was nowhere left to run. The messages, the recordings, the screenshots, everything was there, undeniable and inescapable. Sarah got the confirmation of his arrest with trembling hands. As much as that news brought relief, it was impossible not to feel in some way emotionally drained by everything she had gone through in the last few days. Richard held her hand tightly. He's not going to threaten you anymore. Not you. Not Noah. It's over. She looked at him, taking a deep breath. Is it really over? She asked, like she needed to hear it one more time. He stepped closer, cupped her face with both hands, and answered, his voice full of conviction. It's over, I promise. They hugged tightly, as if trying to pour every emotion into that one embrace. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt like she could finally breathe. Noah, nestled in her arms, woke up and, as if he somehow understood the worst was behind them, looked at both of them, smiled, and babbled something that made them both laugh. Even he knows everything's okay now, Richard said, picking Noah up, making him giggle even more. I think you're right, Sarah replied, smiling, feeling this warm peace in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. The days that followed felt like something out of a movie. News of the scandal took over the media. William was formally charged with fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and conspiracy. Ryan, on the other hand, was charged with blackmail, threats, coercion, attempted kidnapping, and attempted extortion. The company, now free from William, began a process of rebuilding. Richard was officially reinstated as CEO, not just because the evidence cleared his name, but because the shareholders knew the company wouldn't have survived without him. Sarah watched everything unfold closely, not as just an assistant anymore, but as someone who had become essential to it all. One late afternoon, when all the legal issues seemed finally resolved, Richard took her hand, looked into her eyes, and said, I know we've been through so much, and we're still processing it all, but I need you to know, I can't imagine my life without you, without both of you. She smiled, squeezing his hands. Neither can I. I know this whole thing started in the craziest way, he continued with a soft smile. But if I get to choose, I want it to keep going, our way. Sarah laughed, shaking her head. And what exactly is our way, Mr. Walker? He leaned in, cupped her face, and answered just before kissing her again. The way where? I wake up next to you every day. The kiss came full of promises, of certainty, of a future that not long ago had seemed impossible. But now, it was right there, waiting for them. The days that followed were a mix of relief, rebuilding, and, more than anything, hope. With William and Ryan both behind bars, everything finally seemed to fall into place. For the first time, there were no more threats, no more doubts, no more shadows from the past hanging over them. Walker Enterprises went through quick and decisive changes. With Richard back in charge, firm decisions were made. Departments were reorganized, some people were let go, contracts were reviewed. And surprisingly, Sarah wasn't just watching from the sidelines. Richard made sure she was by his side in every meeting, every decision. And more than that, he made it clear to the entire board that she wasn't just his soon-to-be wife. She was someone who had been critical to saving the company. Sitting together in the president's office, where it all had basically started, Richard held her hands, lacing his fingers through hers. I've been thinking, I believe it's time to update your job title. She laughed, a bit suspicious. Update it? Director of Internal Audit, he said seriously, looking her straight in the eyes. You've proven to everyone here that you're more capable than anyone. She blinked, stunned. You're kidding. I'm dead serious. And before you say anything, this isn't a gift. You've earned it, every bit of it. He squeezed her hands. And, if you want, you can start today. Her smile was instant. I accept. He leaned in, brushing his lips against hers, whispering, and there's one more position I'd like to offer you. She raised an eyebrow. Oh yeah? What's that? My wife. Forever. Her laughter burst out before she could hold it back. And without thinking twice, she pulled him closer by his tie and kissed him like the whole world depended on it. The wedding preparations began right away. Not because they were in a rush, but because they both knew there was no reason to wait anymore. All they wanted was to celebrate this love that had started in the most unexpected way, but had become the most certain thing in both their lives. The guest list was small and intimate, made up only of people who were truly part of their journey. Employees from the company who had become close friends, a few neighbors, and of course, Mrs. Margaret. the neighbor who had looked after Noah since the beginning. She was more emotional than anyone else there, as if she were family, and in many ways, she was. On the morning of the wedding, Sarah stood in front of the mirror, looking at her reflection. For the first time in her life, she felt like the person she was meant to be. Not the girl who fought against the world, not the cleaning lady who held back tears just to make ends meet. She was a woman who had made it, a woman who was loved. When the doors opened and she saw Richard at the altar, her eyes filled with tears. He was standing there, smiling as if the whole world had paused for that one perfect moment. Noah, dressed in a little suit, walked down the aisle carrying the rings, looking very serious, though he drew laughter and a few tears from everyone around. Richard never looked away from her, not even for a second. And when she reached him, he took her hands and held them tightly, as if making a silent promise that nothing would ever come between them. The officiant smiled before beginning. There are stories that seem to be written by chance, but in truth, they're living proof that love always finds a way. Sarah felt her chest tighten. When she looked at Richard, she saw he felt the same. He was holding back tears too, but smiling like he knew, deep in his heart, that this was the best day of their lives. When it came time for the vows, Richard gently held her face, ignoring everyone else, and spoke softly, just to her. I promise, in front of everyone, but most of all in front of you, to love you, protect you, and make you happy for the rest of my life. Sarah took a deep breath and held his hands. I promise to love you on all the easy days, but especially on the hard ones. I promise to be your peace, your strength, your home, and I promise that as long as I live, you'll never be alone again. As they exchanged rings, the world seemed to disappear. All that remained was their love. And when the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," they kissed as if it were their very first kiss, and the most important one of their lives. The reception reflected who they were, full of joy, love, and lightness. Richard danced with Noah in his arms, while Sarah laughed watching them, thinking that if there was such a thing as perfection, this was it. Later, during a quiet moment, while the guests were distracted, Richard took her hand and led her out to the garden, glowing with hundreds of tiny white lights. He gently pulled her closer. You know, I don't think I've ever been as happy in my life as I am right now. She smiled and touched his face. Me neither. I'll never get tired of saying this, Sarah. He leaned in closer, their noses touching. I love you. I love you more than I ever thought I could love anyone. She held onto his jacket, smiling. And I love you, Richard. You and Noah are my life, my home, my everything. They kissed there, under the lights, knowing this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of everything. Then Noah's voice rang out, Mom, Dad, and they laughed. When they turned to look at him, holding a piece of cake almost too big for him to carry, they laughed so hard they felt like kids again. Richard scooped up Noah with one arm and held Sarah with the other. Now it's us, a family, he said, looking at them both. And there's nothing more important in the world than that. As the music played and the guests toasted, danced, and smiled, Sarah looked at Richard, held his hand, and whispered, That wrong number turned out to be the right one in my life. He smiled and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Our lucky number. And together that day, in that love, they sealed the kind of certainty that only comes from a story written by fate. What did you think of Sarah and Richard's story? Leave your thoughts in the comments. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate it? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our stories. And click here at the end of the video to watch more touching moments like this one.